In this lecture, you are going to learn about the causes and consequences of the Korean War. After Japan's surrender in September 1945, a U.S.-Soviet joint occupation had paved the way for the division of Korea. Without giving it much thought, the United States and the Soviet Union divided Korea into two occupation zones at the 38th parallel. The setup was supposed to be temporarily. Then, in November 1947, the UN passed a resolution that a united government in Korea should be created, but the Soviet Union refused to cooperate. Only the South held elections. Then the American favored candidate, Syngman Rhee, was elected president. A month later, communists in the North established the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK, under Kim Il-sung. Both governments claimed to stand for a united Korean peninsula. Skirmishes between the North and South Korean troops began in 1948. Then, in the spring of 1950, Stalin hesitantly endorsed North Korean leader Kim Il-sung's plan to liberate the South by force, a plan heavily influenced by Mao's recent victory in China. While he did not desire a military confrontation with the United States, Stalin thought correctly that he could encourage his Chinese comrades to support North Korea if the war turned against the DPRK. The North Koreans launched a successful surprise attack with 90,000 North Koreans. Seoul, the capital of South Korea, fell to the communists on June 28. Truman and his advisors are convinced that the war was instigated by the Soviets, that the North was encouraged to invade by the Russians. But recent evidence suggests that while the Soviets consulted North Korea, Stalin was initially resistant to the idea. Nevertheless, Truman sees the war through this lens and has no choice but to send in troops. Immediately after the North Korean attack, the UN passed resolutions demanding that North Korea cease hostilities and withdraw its armed forces to the 38th parallel, and calling on member states to provide the ROK military assistance to repulse the Northern attack. 16 nations, including many NATO allies, sent troops to Korea, but the United States furnished most of the personnel and weapons, deploying almost 1.8 million troops and dictating military strategy. Initially, the Allies were in a disadvantage. But on September 15, 1950, MacArthur launched a surprise amphibious attack far behind the North Korean lines. Within 2 weeks, the UN forces controlled Seoul. By October, UN forces had pushed the North Koreans back to the 38th parallel. The United States was faced with the decision of whether to invade North Korea and seek to unify the country. transforming the military objective from containment to elimination of the enemy and unification of Korea, enjoyed popular and official support. With UN approval, US forces moved beyond the 38th parallel. Then, as the UN forces continued their advance, General MacArthur disobeyed orders and sent UN forces within 40 miles of China, causing 300,000 Chinese soldiers to cross into Korea. Soon the North Koreans, with the help from the Chinese, recaptured Seoul. Eventually, the United Nations forces regrouped, but the war entered into a bloody stalemate. More soldiers died during the stalemate than at any other point during the war. Considering the circumstances, Truman favored a negotiated settlement, but General Douglas MacArthur, commander of the UN forces, was furious when the goal of the war reverted to containment and challenged this plan. General MacArthur, growing impatient and wanting to eliminate the communist threats, requested authorization to use nuclear weapons against North Korea and China. Truman denied his request to use nuclear weapons. This angered MacArthur, and then he publicly denounced Truman. Truman, unwilling to threaten World War III and refusing to tolerate MacArthur's public insubordination, dismissed the general in April. On June 23, 1951, the Soviet ambassador to the UN suggested a ceasefire, which the US immediately accepted. Peace talks continued for 2 years. In March 1953, Stalin died, and upon winning the next election, Eisenhower made good on his pledge to end the Korean War. Without Stalin, the DPRK warmed to peace, and an armistice agreement was signed on July 27, 1953. The armistice left Korea divided at the 38th parallel, with North and South Korea separated by a 2.5-mile wide demilitarized zone. The war took the lives of 36,000 Americans and wounded 100,000. South Korea lost more than 1 million people to war-related deaths. North Korea and China had 1.8 million killed or wounded. The Truman administration judged the war a success for containment, since the United States had supported its promise to help nations that were resisting communism. Despite both presidents' threats to use nuclear weapons, the war had been limited to conventional weapons. The war had an enormous effect on defense policy and spending, leading to a huge increase in defense spending and tripling of the armed forces. The Korean War convinced the Truman administration to expand his role in Asia by increasing aid to the French, who were fighting to hang on to the colonial empire in Indochina. Coming so soon after World War II and ending without clear victory, Korea became for many Americans a forgotten war. Decades later, the nation's other major intervention in Asia will be anything but forgotten. That is all for now. To learn more, please watch the next video lecture.